Hello, and welcome to this ANSYS SpaceClaim tutorial on separating and joining STL and OBJ meshes. Today we're going to take a look at a scan part as well as a CAD export. First we'll start with the scan, and if you don't have it open already, you want to go to File, Open, browse to the folder where you downloaded the part, and you may see nothing or no files here. Make sure you change the file filter to either all files or STL files. I'm going to change it to STL files because I do want to show here that there is a units option. So by default, it's automatic. If it comes in the wrong size, you could always overwrite it. And we're going to be doing separate scan and STL separate. So go ahead and open up the scan one first. And we're going to take a look at our facets tab and the organize group. So here you'll see three separate tools: separate, separate all, and join. And first let's take a look at separate. When I turn on the separate tool, there are two tool guides here to choose from. The first one is called select shells, and what that really means is select an individual piece. I could choose to break this piece off, any one of these, or here I could choose to break off the one that I actually want to separate. The other tool guide allows me to pick on a single mesh body. Notice that in the tree, it considers all of these different pieces to be a single mesh body. And if I were to click here, it would do a separate all. And I just gave it a click, and you could see that it separated it into many different pieces, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to undo back. In this case, separate all would have the same effect as this tool guide right here, because separate all will separate everything here. If we had multiple mesh bodies, it would separate all of them. Here it allows me to fully separate an individual mesh body. But what I want to do is I want to pick an individual piece to separate. So I'm going to stick with this default separate tool guide called select shells. And I'm just going to go ahead and highlight the piece that I want and click it. And you'll notice we now have two separate mesh pieces or mesh objects. The first one here and the second one is all that noise around it, and the second one is the piece I want. I'm going to escape out or go back to my select tool. This is the one I want, so I'm going to right click on the other one and simply say delete, and now I've got the piece of the scan that I want, and I can go and reverse engineer or work with this, thicken it, use any of these other tools that I might want to use, even auto fix to try to join it all up and seal it off. But let's go ahead and let's go to the other file. Again, you'll want to go to File, Open if you don't have it open. Browse to the folder and choose either All Files or STL, and pick the STL separate right here and open it. Now first I want to show you kind of what we're dealing with, because this does look like it is a solid mesh. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on my little world origin. I'm going to select the Y-axis, hold Control and select the Z-axis. And in the Design tab, I'm going to go into this cross-section mode. The keyboard shortcut is X. And if we look at this, we actually find that it's hollow on the inside. It's not solid. And if we look at some of the different parts, like this button here, you notice the button has absolutely no bottom to it. Same thing with these joystick knobs. There's no bottom to them at all. So from the outside, this looks like a solid. This looks like a solid button right here, but in fact, they are all hollow, zero thickness shells. Now I'm going to go back to 3D here and go back to our facets tab, because theoretically, we could try to do one of two things. We could either do an auto fix on this entire thing and then try to separate the pieces, or we could separate the pieces and then auto fix each one. Let's just see why we wouldn't auto fix it first. If I click auto fix here, and what it's doing is it's fixing any self-intersections, and it's closing up any holes, and it's fixing any normals that are in the wrong direction. Now I'm going to go back to my select tool here, and I'm going to click on this cross-section mode again, and then I'm just going to click right in the screen, and that'll put us back into the same cross-section. Now here, it did an okay job with this button, separating, keeping them separate and as separate pieces and not joined up. But if I use this move grid button at the bottom here, and I click this blue arrow, and then I drag in that direction till our cross section is through the part, you can see here that it's actually joined these different pieces together. These are no longer separate. And if I go back to 3D mode with the 3D mode button right here, and I go back to my facets tab and I do a separate all, I'm going to go back to select. I'm going to click on this mesh body here. This happens to be the first one in the tree, and I'm going to uncheck it. And when I uncheck it, we don't really see what we expect. There's really no other separate pieces besides a couple little buttons on the back. I think those are like LEDs, and then some faces on the inside. So you'll see here that auto fixing and assembly and then trying to separate is not going to get you your individual pieces. Now I want to undo back, but I don't want to go step by step. So there is a nice drop down here, and I want to go back to before the auto fixing a mesh. So here we are back before auto fixing. You see the pink colors on the outside. Those are the inside faces, which are on the wrong side. And we have that one mesh again. And I have two options. I could use my separate tool. And again, here you could see that I can choose individual pieces. So if I only cared about breaking off one of these buttons, this joystick here, any of these other buttons, I have the freedom to do that. But my goal in this is to actually have these all be separate individual pieces that I can print out and put back together. So I could choose this separate meshes button here. Notice that as I hover over, it highlights the whole thing. And I could click to separate it into all of the individual pieces. But that takes a couple steps, and I know from the get-go that I want to separate everything. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Separate All, and it's going to do all of that for me. Now I'm going to go back to my Select tool by either clicking the Select tool or hitting Escape. And if I click a face on the mesh here, I could see that, or highlight here, I could see it's this mesh in the tree. I also have the option to right-click on it and say Locate in Structure Tree. I'll show that one more time. Right-click, Locate in Structure Tree. It highlights it here, and if I uncheck that, we can now see all these correct individual pieces. Now I'm going to do a couple extra things in this tutorial outside of the Organize group in the goal of joining things back together. So I'm going to turn on my Auto Fix tool, and one thing I could do is I could either click them in the design window. Notice that it solidifies that. It puts the inside faces on the inside and the outside faces on the outside. I could go through and click these one by one. Another option, if I zoom out a little bit and show you here, I can click them in the tree. Notice if I just keep clicking the top one here, what happens is it takes this open STL and it puts it at the bottom of the tree as a closed STL. So sometimes quicker than clicking them in the actual design window, I could just do a bunch of clicks right here. You could see them highlighting and changing colors as I click them. I can kind of manage the tree right here, seeing how many open ones I still have left. We could see the tree moving up here. And we just got one more to do right there. Now there is one little piece left right here, but I'm going to, and when I try to auto fix it, it dings out. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hide everything in the tree and show that one little piece. And this is actually an extra triangle called an over-connected triangle, or it makes the mesh over-connected. And oftentimes the Separate or Separate All tool will break off these extraneous triangles that we don't really need, and it's obviously just a single triangle, really can't auto fix that. So here's one that we're just going to select and delete because we don't really need it in the design. Now I'm going to recheck the top level here to bring everything back. And one thing I like doing with assemblies is just having them be a bunch of different colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the different pieces in the tree by selecting the first one, holding down Shift and selecting the last one. And here in the display tab under the color dropdown, I can do this randomize colors. And, I might go ahead and click it a few times just to get a nice randomization of colors here. And, if any one of them you want a different color, maybe this is better as a red, you can go ahead and change that there. Now, having these as separate pieces allows me to choose individual pieces with the Facets tab and export those to individual STL files if I want to print them on their own. If I do want to print this all as one, I could just do a File, Save As, and choose STL. And what it'll actually do is join all of those back together into a single mesh body for easier 3D printing. But we might want to print them individually, but there may be some pieces that broke off that we actually want to join back up. For example, it may be important to have these buttons as separate pieces so I could actually push them in and actuate. But something like this little screw head, which is really just capping off this hole right here, I probably want to print with the main housing here. So what the join tool does, the third one in the organize group, it says first click the mesh body to target, and that's going to be our large piece here. And now it says click a mesh body to join with the already targeted body, and we'll click that one here. And now those are a single mesh. If I hover over here, it highlights this bottom one in the tree. So let me uncheck the entire mesh, recheck the bottom one, and now we can see that those are single pieces. So you are able to join them back together as well. And there is one other option in the join tool. You'll notice this one allows you to specify individual bodies to join, similar to the way the first tool guide in separate does. The second tool guide in join is also similar to the second tool guide in separate. It says click a mesh body to join all other mesh bodies into. So if this was my main mesh body and I decided I wanted a single mesh to be able to print, maybe I needed to separate, autofix, and join back up before printing. Maybe this model was not printable. So here, what I could do, and this works whether they're hidden or not, but I do want to show them all. Here it just says click a mesh body to join all other mesh bodies into. Click right here. And now we're back to a single mesh body. Now, sometimes in joining back together, it may introduce some other problems. We always want to do a check mesh. Multiple pieces and self-intersecting. We know it's multiple pieces, that's okay. But we could always run an autofix or run the intersections tool in order to fix those self-intersections. And now if we go back into a cross-section, selecting Y and Z, and going into cross-section mode, we can see that it is a solid mesh on the inside instead of that hollow shell that we initially started with. So these are some applications of the separate, separate all, and join tool. Thank you and have a great day.